5 are internal discussion items, so they're of less critical importance. So item 2 and 3 we believe are ready to discuss.
Okay, let's proceed. Item number 1, approval of the regular minutes of the July 1 meeting.
Make a motion that we approve the minutes.
I'll second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Item number 2, application number Z08-6 filed by Compro Realty on behalf of Western Extralite, requesting a zone change in zoning district classification from C3 Shopping Center District to PC3 Planned Shopping Center District with outdoor storage permitted. Then there's a long description of the property, which I'm not going to read. I'm going to let the secretary add that. All in Block C, Park West addition to the city of Salina, Saline County, Kansas, and is addressed as 1320 Armory Road. Dean, how about a staff report?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the Commission. This is a request that involves a request to change the zoning district classification on a piece of property that I think you're familiar with because you looked at it earlier this year. It is the former Food for Less grocery store. It's addressed off of Armory Road. I think most people refer to it as being off of Broadway Boulevard. The store building on this property dates back to 1979. Our records indicate that the building has always been used principally as a grocery store, and that was its last occupancy. I think we indicated in our report it has ceased to be used as a grocery store for about a 2-year period now. The building, as it's constructed, is 190 feet east-west by 128 feet north-south. There's an extension on the north face for an entryway, and there's a bump out on the south side, and there's a loading dock there as well. I think one thing that's unusual about this building is that the frontage and the legal street address is Armory Road, but the way the building was built and oriented is to face north towards the Kmart parking lot. I think if you recall back in February, the first meeting we had, there was a proposal put forward to convert this to from a grocery store to an indoor climate-controlled mini storage facility. And after reviewing that, you approved a conditional use permit for that change in use, subject to a couple stipulations. And after that meeting, that transaction fell through, and no work was ever done on converting the building. Compro Realty, the applicant here, has secured a new contract purchaser. They are interested in purchasing and adapting this building to their use. The potential purchaser is Western Extralite. They're a wholesale supplier, electrical supplier, and retailer. And I think they would be in a better position to describe the nature of their business. But because they do have a retail showroom, a component to their business, they were interested in a visible high-traffic location as opposed to a industrial park type location, even though they will have a majority of this building space used primarily for warehouse. They plan to renovate and reuse the existing building according to the current footprint and floor plan. Again, I think that plan is to use the north face as the front part of the building as a retail showroom and offices. The remainder would be a warehouse and storage space, I think, as depicted on the plan. The primary reason for the request today is that we have a request to add outdoor storage area, probably, and again, this can be explained better by the applicants, but for materials that relate to their business and the wholesale side of their business. Our C3 district is primarily a shopping center district designed to accommodate retail and service businesses, offices, restaurants, where their activities are conducted within a completely enclosed building. The one exception to that is a Dillon's or a Walmart or a Kmart can have a garden center accessory that can have the outdoor display and sale of plants and gardening supplies. The outdoor storage component of the business is not allowed under the current C3 zoning. And so rather than looking at a change to go to C5 or to perhaps a light industrial designation that would change the zoning pattern in the Park West addition, what the applicant has done is submitted a plan to you showing 2 possible outdoor storage areas, and they have requested approval of a planned commercial district. The only part of this that needs your approval of an exception would be the outdoor storage component that they have proposed. So they're requesting a variation or an exception to that restriction on outdoor storage. In a planned commercial district, you're authorized to approve deviations or exceptions to the C3 development standards, and that is simply a judgment decision for you about whether a deviation or variation should be approved. We've kind of summarized for you the C3 development standards. One limit is you can cover 40% of a building lot with buildings. Currently, this covers 22% of the lot, and there's no plans to add on at this time. The parking that's available and provided for a grocery store use would far exceed what the minimum parking requirements would be for this type of business. If we look back to the zoning pattern here, it has been C3 since 1979 when the store was built. The building's been empty for close to 2 years. If this were approved for this use, it would put a vacant retail building back into productive use. I think the question for you is whether this property is suitable for this type of use or whether it's more suitable for as prime retail space or some other form of commercial redevelopment, which is being proposed here. The other question would be, is lifting of the use limitation on storage needed to make this an economically viable reuse of the property? I think you're pretty familiar with this corridor. You've got Kmart and the Ace Hardware Complex that are the retail anchors. Broadway is still primarily a retail corridor. It's a very heavily traveled corridor. If you look on the east side, we have a lot of C5 zoning. You have C3 zoning north of Armory, and then south of Armory we have some I-1 zoning for the contractors' offices and uses on the south side of Armory Road. If you look to the west, this area here is zone C3. As this is vacant C3, while that is still C3, it probably won't likely ever develop with the real traffic-dependent commercial uses that you normally see on a corridor. We don't see the changes being proposed by the applicant having a detrimental effect on neighboring properties, but there will be a change in the nature of activity here from predominantly retail to predominantly wholesale. But if you look across the street, we do have contractors' offices and a mini storage facility south of that. There shouldn't be any impact on public utilities and services. So we have traffic counts on Broadway of over 21,000 cars a day, which makes it one of the city's heavily traveled streets. I think if you could go back to one of their representative site plans, John. One thing that is unique here is that, again, the building's legal frontage and address is Armory Road, but the orientation is to the north towards this entrance drive here. This, at one time, was a public, or intended to be a public street, and it was later vacated, but it's still the primary entry into the property. So from a zoning standpoint, this is the front yard, this is the rear yard, but the way that they function is absolutely reversed, where the main entryway and the attractive side of the building is the north side, and the back loading area is on the front side. So there's a drawing, I believe we didn't have colorized available for you, but you now have at your places. They are considering two options for outdoor storage. One would be considered front yard storage here. The other would be side yard storage here. And they would need to speak to which one of those would work best for them from a functional standpoint. What we understand is if they plan to enclose whichever area is selected with an 8-foot fence for security purposes, and I think if you look at what the impact would be of having or adding an outdoor storage area, it's really a function of what type of fencing material is used, how attractive it is, how it blends in with the building and the surroundings. We do not require in commercial areas that outdoor storage areas be screened from one another or from either other commercial properties or public streets. But because this is a C3 area and because this is a planned district, you would certainly have the authority or discretion to require that any outdoor storage have solid side obscuring screening as opposed to open enclosures. So do you have the slide, John, about the options for the two areas? Or did that make it? When we reviewed their plans, we looked at the south side. That area that was proposed on the south side ran from the loading dock west. It should say from the west edge of the loading dock west, approximately 3,900 feet. The other option would be that they would construct a new overhead door on the east wall of the building, and that area that is proposed is about 4,350 square feet. The options they would have, if you were looking at requiring solid screening, using pre-finished metal panels, or a solid wood fence or something of a masonry material would be an option. If you were looking at security enclosure but not necessarily requiring screening, then chain link that's powder coated, meaning that you'd have black chain link fence that has powder coat paint, or chain link with some sort of mesh fabric would be options. There's not really an option to do the outdoor storage on the west side of the building because the building sits right on the west property line. So if we look at the comprehensive plan for Broadway Boulevard, it's still shown as commercial retail on the future land use plan. It's still designed intended to have a broad mix of commercial and retail uses, and this would, because of the retail showroom, it would fit within this area, but it would not be considered a prime retail use and could be considered a step away from grocery stores, department stores, those types of things. Your alternatives in this case would be to, after I think hearing what the preference is for east or south storage areas, would be to approve the change from C3 to PC3 and the plan either for south or for east storage, or you could leave it optional to them, not make that a designation today, and you could do that without imposing a screening requirement. although you could still specify the fencing materials. Your second option would be to make the same recommendation but require that any outdoor storage areas be enclosed by site obscuring screening. Again, you would have the discretion to specify the materials. You could postpone consideration of this request if you think you need additional information to make a decision, or you could deny the applicant's request to allow outdoor storage altogether, citing the reasons for that. So I think with that, I'd try to be available to answer any questions.
Okay, Dean, thank you. Any questions from the bench, to the staff?
Dean,
That report.
all those businesses to the south, they're construction-related businesses, is that correct?
Yes, this is a restaurant. Well, it used to be a restaurant. Now it's an auto parts store here. This is a contractor's office, contractor's office, contractor's office, and then there's a
Tough piano.
yeah. Are we missing a building, Jeff? That's
We've added that storage. There's,
right.
That people are operating at. There's just storage behind the small building to the west.
Yeah, it's right back here. That is it's used as a storage building, but the zoning designation, originally what was done was that the property was zoned C3. The Planning Commission approved conditional use permits for contractors' offices, and of course you have the limitation in C3 about outdoor storage. Well, that really doesn't work very well for contractors. So what was done was that that southern tier of lots here was rezoned from here over to I-1 Industrial Park, and then from here over, actually it starts here, I-2 all the way around the other side. But the inside ring is all C3 shopping center.
Is there another example in town where there is outdoor storage that's been allowed in a C3 district?
Well, the only case of somewhat similar would be the Waters True Value Earth Care case, where we have a limitation on the amount the outdoor garden center is supposed to be subordinate to the a department store or grocery store. In that case, their outdoor display area is bigger than their store, and then they have outdoor storage at the rear of that. That was done through a planned C3 and a plan approval by the Planning Commission. That would be the only example. We tried to take some photographs, and they didn't develop properly. At the corner of South and Clark Street, there's American Electric, which is a wholesale electric. They have a chain link fenced area on the east side of that property. We were attempting to get a photograph of that because we thought it might depict the type of materials that might be in the fenced area, and those photos did not turn out. But certainly you have some outdoor display in C3 for flowers, garden centers, that types of thing. But it's more of a rarity to have a outdoor storage area. So that's why this would be an exception. But for us, it was important to try to preserve the C3 development pattern. So we thought that maintaining the C3 but looking at a limited exception both as to area and enclosure for outdoor storage, and leave it to your judgment how that should be handled.
Would we as a commission have the option of designated where we thought the storage might be preferable, like on the south side as opposed to the east side?
Yes, I think you should hear from the applicant what their preference is, but yes, that you would have the option after reviewing that to say that you wish to designate which of those you think is preferable.
Okay. Any other questions? I'd like to hear from the applicant. Please state your name and address for the record.
Okay, I'm Charles Renz with Jones Gillum Renz Architects. I'm here representing Western Extra Light. I'm joined by the owner of Western Extra Light, Tom Eisenberg, also Leith Windsor of Western Extra Light, and Jeff Mays of Compro. One of the things I'd like to just go over a couple of points in regard to this project. Dean has done a good job spelling out what our intent is as far as the plan for the building, how that's going to be used. We've identified 2 areas right now as storage, as potential areas for storage. Tom will come up and speak with you a little bit about how he foresees those working for their company. He can probably fill you in a little bit better, give you a little better information than I can about that, so he will address that. One thing I do want to point out is that because we're not required to screen commercial use from other commercial uses or from the industrial, it is our intent to go in here with security fencing that is approximately 8 feet high, that will be a black powder coated or a PVC coated mesh material. I'll give you some examples. I'll show you a couple pictures of what we're doing. Most notably, you might see it around some of the schools here. Metal Arc School has some of that around their playground. And if you're familiar with the tennis courts, here's some photographs of the tennis courts that are under construction right now. So I'll just pass these around. If you've seen that, I'm sure most of you have. It is a nice material. It does give a nice appearance, a nice, clean, finished appearance. As far as the areas that we have identified for storage, the areas on the south, it's our intent, as you can see here, that that area will be confined to the property. It will not extend into the right-of-way. It will remain in that, I guess, so-called front yard. The area to the east is, again, intended to extend out maybe 30, 35 feet from the building. The areas that Dean gave you, as far as those 2, are pretty close to what I had come up with, within a couple hundred square feet. I think I had 4,000, approximately 4,000 on the east and about 3,800 on the south. But that may be subject to a little bit of change, but in general, that's pretty accurate. We've also taken care to ensure that none of the storage area extends into any right-of-way, again on the south, or any access way over on the east. We want to make sure that those areas, that those remain plenty wide to accommodate vehicles in and out of the area. The rest of the parking for the facility is either existing, like you see on the east half of the property, and we have made some modifications to the striping over on the west half directly north of the building, just to accommodate the change in property lines. As far as the intended appearance of the building, the changes are fairly cosmetic in nature. There will be some cleanup of the building. We'll be adding some overhead doors. The big yellow billboard signage and banding that you see, that will remain, but that will be cleaned up. We'll incorporate the company colors and some actual building signage into that. I think probably the most significant improvement to that just comes with the fact that we'll be cleaning up and putting a good, reputable business and providing activity into this area. Hopefully, certainly eliminating any of the vandalism that has a tendency to show up, and just providing some vibrance back to that area. So, does anybody have any additional questions for me?
I do. Mr. Renz,
Sure.
on the north side of directly north of the building, on the photograph that I'm looking at, there's some triangles, and it says photo beside them. Can you tell me what that
On
means?
the photos, what you see here, the photos that you see, those are existing photos. So when you see photo, there's a little area, and it'll refer back to photo 1 or
That's the
photo
angle
A on the building. That's just where we're taking that picture from, just to kind of get everybody oriented.
I didn't know if there was photo eyes there for some security purpose or something.
No, no, it's strictly just to communicate what the appearance of the building is from a different perspective.
Can you also tell me what the intended traffic flow is there? Is it do you intend for traffic to come in from the north side and then come to the building and come in from the north, or do you intend to try to get them off of Armory?
Well, I think there could be some of both, and I'll let Tom, as he identifies how they envision the storage working and the traffic flow through there, he might be able to address that part a little bit better. Now, there is, of course, the retail component to this project, which is very significant. Just from a guy who goes to the store every now and then, I would anticipate a lot of that coming from the north, that access. Strictly because, as Dean said, that is what we all think of as the front of the building. So I hope that answered your question.
It did. Thank you.
Okay.
Any other questions? Okay, we're going to hear from Tom.
Yeah.
Okay, your name and address, please.
Sure. Tom Eisenberg, 1470 Liberty, Kansas City, Missouri. And first of all, thank you very much for the opportunity to come before you today. As Charles said, I'm here with Leith Windsor. Leith is the manager that's going to be responsible for our location here. Western Extralite, just to give you a little bit of background, is 70 years old this year. And we're a family-owned business that does electrical distribution, both wholesale and retail. We have a total of 17 locations, and this will be our, if we are able to come here, it'll be our furthest point west, so we're kind of excited about that. We look forward to being in Salina, to invest in the community, to promote activity, and the location that we hopefully will be able to make work for us, we think will allow us to do that. Our customers are electrical contractors and other entities that use electrical products, as well as retail people that can come in and buy electrical products. And they get their product either from our deliveries, or they come in and pick up. Regarding which way they're going to come in, you folks from Salina could probably tell me which way you'd like to go in, and that's probably the way that our customers will want to come in. So I really can't speak with authority on whether they're going to come from the south or from the north, but you probably got a sense about that. In terms of the storage location, something that we do feel strongly about is that we would much prefer the storage on the east side. We're going to have a new garage door that will be on the east side but towards the south end, and we anticipate storing electrical conduit outside, and it'll be stored in neat cantilevered racks, so it'll be stored horizontally, and it would be much more efficient for our warehouse operation on the inside, and much more really frankly safe to have it on that side, because as you can see on the south side, while it wouldn't be unsafe, there's just more access and there's more room to maneuver the 10-foot conduit on the east side. We are very, very excited again about the possibilities to repeat the conduit that we plan to store outside will be on cantilevered racks. We store it that way for a variety of reasons. One, it looks neater, and appearance is an important part of the image we try and present to our customers. We also feel that it's more organized, and in a business that is about keeping track of inventory, that organization is important. And then finally, we think that it's safer. So we ask that you approve the request that we're making for the PC3 amendment, and thank you very much for your time.
Any questions of Tom?
On the east side, then, the side that runs along parallel to Broadway, of your storage area that you're requesting, how many feet is that about?
How many feet is it this way, or is it
North-south.
away north-south?
Yes.
I expect that it would be between 20 and 25 feet. So we would have two 10-foot lengths cantilever rack, and there's a little bit in between, so 20 to 25 feet.
You anticipate storing anything else out there?
No.
Do you guys deal in anything as large as, say, transformers or?
The transformers that we typically deal in are smaller. We certainly have transformers, but the transformers like that are on utility poles, we're not in that business.
Any other questions?
Only 25 feet long there.
No, he's talking about width. I think the question was
Oh.
length,
Yeah.
it's showing the entire width of the
Yeah,
building.
I don't anticipate us having that whole length of, I mean, we'd have, maybe we'd have 3 sections of cantilever rack. You know, it depends on how much we'd grow, but I do not anticipate us ever having that full length that's shown on that drawing.
But you'd certainly have more than 25 feet.
Yes.
We had shown that as the overall area, the overall area
Correct.
as a worst case. When we're showing
I'd
that full
say-
length.
I would say one thing that we did is when we measured it as a staff, we interpreted that to be about 30 feet wide and 145 feet long.
Yeah.
That's how we came up with our number. The other thing we did is we looked at the 15% allowance that we have for the outdoor garden center things, and that area that is shown there on the east as depicted is about 15% of the area of the building. So it's really not
So that'd be the
disproportionate.
maximum-
Correct.
Right.
Maximum you'd ever use.
Correct.
There'd be some gates or something in this fence.
Correct, because we need to get the
Get
stuff
in.
in and out. Absolutely.
And those would be located probably on the east side, I assume?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, any other questions? Anyone else from your,
Group? I don't believe so.
Will you be moving to Salina then?
I'm actually the regional manager,
Ah.
and I'm in charge of Manhattan and Junction City as well as Salina. I'll actually have an operations manager who will be moving to Salina. He's currently not here tonight.
I think they've made an offer on a house.
Oh, really? Call me. They don't know how to grease the wheels of government, do they?
I don't know that I would say that
Anything
on
else?
public
Well, I was
television.
all for it.
Thank you for your time.
okay, thank you. Sir, you have a comment?
Dennis Lauber from the Salina Chamber of Commerce.
Okay.
We've been aware of this project for a while. We've worked with Tom's company. Actually, that operations manager and his wife came to town, and we were able to meet a need of theirs at the company's request, just to give them kind of a personalized tour of the community and raise their comfort level about Salina being a good place for him. He knew this was a great career opportunity and a good employer. Wanted to verify and know that this was the right community for him, so we talked about how Salina is a community full of opportunity for young people who want to work hard, and had a great tour, a great time with his family. They were able to see a number of the other aspects of the community that were really important to them, making the decision of whether or not they wanted to follow up on the opportunity that Tom gave them. From our observation point, a couple things that we believe are important about this to remember. Certainly it generates investment in an empty vacant area or a vacant building. The job creation that will be generated, and I know Tom didn't have a chance to touch on, between 7 and 10 jobs initially, and if they things proceed as they expect, we could be up to 20 jobs. And there's a combination of the example we just talked about, people moving into the community, which we certainly want to see occur, but also hiring folks that are already here in the area, which is certainly a positive thing. And then finally, a good thing to remember, I think, from the overall development of Broadway and this area of the community, it's going to generate traffic, and that traffic will be traffic internal to their store, but also traffic that, oh, you know what, as long as you're over there, why don't you run over to Kmart or run over and hit this other retailer, run through this other drive-through, and help create more retail activity and generate more activity in the area. So thank you and for your time. And again, we would encourage you to move this forward.
Okay.
Thank you.
So this will have a retail operation.
Yes.
Are you going to sell, for example, appliances in here? Just electrical stuff?
Electrical and communication products.
So if I want a chandelier, can I go in and you'll have a showroom with chandeliers? No.
We're not saying anyone at this time.
Okay.
But we could certainly.
That's what I want.
We could certainly help you with that.
It's a lighting store.
All right.
You better give them both fenced
Any
in
other
areas.
comments
Yeah.
from the audience? This really is a public hearing, so we need to hear from the public if there's anyone that would like to speak for the project or even against the project. Anyone? Okay, if there's no comments there, I'll bring it back to the bench for discussion and hopefully action.
Well, I think it sounds like an exciting reutilization of a vacant property, and I would, from a planning commission standpoint, I don't have a preference either way, whether that be on the east side or the south side for the storage area. I think the one on the south side, you have primarily construction businesses over there. On the east side, there's some, I don't see what's going to be outside there as being a detrimental to the people to the east there. So I guess with that, I would make a motion that we approve application 08-6 with the, Dean, would the best bet
Well,
be to make it?
I had some language here I was going to run by you, and if they've had the designation of a preference for the east side if the majority of the commission is comfortable with that, but for the sake of we've got a plan that we think puts a specified area there. That one of the notes I had here with the allowance of a outdoor storage area of up to 4,200 square feet on the east side of the building to be enclosed by a black powder-coated mesh fencing 8 feet in height. That would pretty specifically describe their proposal, and then to pin that down as that's what was presented, and that would be what would result.
Before we have a motion, could we just talk about the aesthetics? Would you mind that? I was hoping that you were going to prefer the south, because I think that I don't have much of a problem as you proceed down Broadway that's going to be an issue. As it's on the east side, I think it's far more visible, and then I think we move into another area that makes me a little bit more uncomfortable, because we're making an exception if we don't require any kind of site enclosure. Screening. The options, I think that mesh stuff is not a good option, because I think it ends up, do you know what I'm talking about? The mesh that goes along the fence? Fabric stuff, yeah. I think that can look not any more attractive than just a chain link fence, in my opinion. And I understand a wooden fence, of course, is expensive for that kind of a length. And I was thinking about the option of something perhaps just running on the Broadway side, not enclosing it. I don't know. I'm just a little concerned that as much as I want you here and want to do whatever we can to bring you here, this is an exception that we're making to our own rules here, and I think we just need to think about that.
I think one of the things for me that's important, in what little I've seen of the powder-coated fencing, it does have a certain shielding effect, for lack of a better word. It does kind of dampen the view through it. And the distance from Broadway to where that screen would be, do we have any kind of idea what that would be in terms of feet?
Well, it would be probably close to
425
300 feet from Broadway to the edge of the Arby's lot, and then probably another 45 beyond that. I don't know if you've got the measure tool, John, but I would say we're probably looking at over 300 feet.
You know, I guess for me, given the distance and the natural screening ability of that product, and plus when I had asked Tom about what was going to be inside there, I think you have, with conduit and the racks that he's talking about, I've seen those, for example, American Electric has the same type of racks. Those are a lot of, Mr. Renz will probably play to this, a lot of horizontal lines. The stuff will kind of disappear in there, I think, if I'm not mistaken. It'll kind of be hidden somewhat, but to me, a football field away, I guess that's my age showing. I have a little.
How high are those racks? Do you know how tall they are?
There's several different heights that you can go, but
I guess my question is, would they extend above the 8-foot fence?
they could possibly.
But if you're below that and you look up, it would likely be behind your line of sight.
Right.
It's
Well,
not
I'm-
going to be 20 feet up. You know, I wouldn't want to commit today that it's not going to be.
Because you
10
got to
feet.
reach your materials from the ground, don't you?
Well, we would use a fork.
Forklift?
Yes.
Well, I'm not as concerned with that. I mean, it's, I think the trade-off, I live over, well, close to that, I pass that area. I even forget Food for Less is there, to be honest with you. I drive by it 20 times a day. I don't even notice the building's there, so I doubt I'm going to notice a little enclosed fencing part. I appreciate what Sydney's doing, what she's looking at, trying to keep the aesthetics going. I'm all for a pretty town, but let's face it, Food for Less building isn't pretty or really noticeable. It kind of hides back there, and I'd go a step further, and I would say, if you want to put some storage on the east side and some in the south, provided it doesn't extend that 4,200 foot, I'd say at this point, allow that option as well, because maybe you don't need all 4,200 feet on one side. Maybe you put 2,100 there later, and you decide, that south area would be perfect for transformers or whatever you grow into. I'd take it a step further and say, provided you don't extend over that 4,200 foot, build them both. Bring business, bring jobs, bring money, sell houses. Have your next manager call me. Well, Tim will sell them houses. He's next on the agenda. We'll bust right through it. We can just combine them.
Are you going to have delivery trucks and vehicles parked around the facility? And where would they be parked?
That is a possibility. Most of the trucks would be out during the day,
Understand that.
and we would have some indoor storage, but
There's a dock in the southeast corner, a delivery dock, and I expect that that's where the trucks would be parked, in that area. You're thinking about it in the evening now?
Yeah, after hours.
Yeah, they would be parked there.
How many
or on the
trucks would
south
that
side.
be roughly?
Well, in the beginning, we're going to have one.
Okay.
But two. In the beginning, we're going to have two. But if this business grows like we hope it will, we can have more. We're not going to have a fleet of 10. I would say that's.
We want you to have more.
Yeah.
But I think that less than 5.
And I guess from another standpoint, if there is a retail component to this, does although somewhat obscure visibility of conduit out there, is that something that's beneficial to you?
Certainly lets people know we have it, so that's beneficial. We hadn't really thought about it in those terms.
Anything else? We're ready for a motion here. We started one. And
I think Dean's rewriting it over there.
That's what I was initially going to say, is if we keep this to the 15% and let them decide what is best used for their facility, is that a reasonable motion, or is that something you guys can get your hands around?
No, that was something that we had discussed, was that if we reached the point where the concept was acceptable, but there wasn't a final decision or preference for designating which side, then you could make an allowance for an outdoor storage area of up to 4,200 square feet on the east and south sides of the building to be enclosed by powder-coated mesh fencing 8 feet in height. Would be, by making it east and south, that would allow for both, either or both. So in other words, if they had a smaller area on the east and they had a need on the south, that would still allow that, but it would still require that to be fenced with the same material.
Mm-hmm.
And they could choose to take their 4,200 square feet and take some of it on the south and some of it on the east. I think that would create the most flexibility. Or you can specify which side, or designate which side it should be on. But if you said east and south, that would allow for both.
Go ahead.
All right, I would make a motion that we approve application Z08-6 with up to 4,200 square feet of fenced-in area on either the south or the east or both, with an 8-foot chain link powder-coated fence.
I'll second it.
Okay. Now that we have a motion, any further discussion before we vote? Call for the vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Passed.
That will go
5-0.
to the City Commission with a recommendation of approval.
Thank you.
Thank you. Item number 3, application number P08-4/4A, filed by Golden Eagle Estates, requesting approval of a final plat of Golden Eagle's Estate Number 5, a proposed 77-lot subdivision of a 31.19-acre tract, which also includes a proposed neighborhood park site. The subject property is located on the north side of Wayne Avenue, east of the Huntington Road ditch. I think we've talked about this before, but we'll have a staff report from Dean.
Mr. Chairman, members of the Commission, the abbreviated version, summary that went out in the packet referred to this as being approved on March 4th. Your initial hearing on this was March 4th. The action actually took place on the 15th of April, and you approved a preliminary development plan and plat for Golden Eagle Estates Number 5 Plan Development District, and as part of that, 20-foot front yard setbacks were allowed on the interior and perimeter lots for Block 1 and Block 2, and that was a reduction from 25 feet, and that would be on Wildcat Circle. There were 2 lots identified next to the pathway into the park from the north that would be allowed to have a reduced side yard setback. There's a townhome area or duplex area, as whatever term is preferred. That is the lots that abut the flood control levee on the east. There was approval to allow up to 3 units per building on the 2 lots directly east of the substation, and a 15-foot front yard setback was allowed there to push the buildings forwards away from the overhead transmission line and to allow for parking at the side or rear. And then as a compromise, and we still don't have a final plan, but the lot on Red Hawk Lane was approved for up to 4 single-family attached dwellings containing no more than 2 units per building, and requiring that a 30-foot setback be maintained on Red Hawk Lane. there was a condition that they're coming back to fulfill now, that the final plat be submitted and approved. When they have final development plans developed for the lots next to the substation and at the east end of Wayne, then those would come back to you for your review. The city engineer had to approve the preliminary plans and specifications for stormwater, sanitary sewer, water, and streets. That has been done. I believe you have a letter at your places there from Mr. Nelson, who has reviewed those plans, and they are approved from the city side, subject to approval of some details by the Army Corps of Engineers. When we get to the final stage of being ready for permits, a requirement that there be some flow tests done just to confirm that the projected or modeled fire flow requirements are met by the system that's been installed. What we're going to focus on with the final plat, since we focused so much on the park earlier, was one, the rear yard drainage concept that's being proposed here. Two, we think before we get to the final recorded version of the plat, there is a location here where the 100-year flood elevation goes from 1231 to 1230, and we want to confirm with the applicant, their engineer and surveyor, to make sure that we have correctly depicted the floodplain. As it stands now with this contour, these lots here would all be considered to be within the 100-year floodplain that would either have an elevation requirement or a limitation on the ability to have basements. We want to make sure that we get that correctly depicted on the plat. As far as the Huntington Road ditch, in 2004, that was identified as a city-funded flood and drainage fund project. There aren't going to be any flood and drainage fund projects done this year or in the immediate identified future, so the timing of that's probably not going to correspond with the development of this subdivision. And then we wanted to clarify from the applicant whether, and he can't speak for future builders, but whether there are any thoughts about basements within the 500-foot area of the levee. We do have some proposed in River Trail to the south and some that are built, but there's quite a bit of difference between a basement that's constructed within 500 feet of the levee and a conventional basement. And if we had more time, we'd let Mr. Nelson speak to that, but he'd probably take up a good half hour of your time explaining the fine points of that. So
we would certainly make it short and sweet.
I think maybe we'll start with the rear yard drainage concept, and there's a supplemental report up there, and the purpose of that was kind of summarize where we've been and how we got what we're currently doing today. It's primarily an April, May, June phenomena where the planning department and engineering department get many phone calls during those 3 months about rear yard drainage problems in residential subdivisions of ponding, of water trapped, of water not going away, of my neighbors built up and trapped all this water on my lot and now it has no place to go. So we have historically given developers the option of using storm sewers, open channels, or swales located on property lines or rear lot lines to address lot runoff. Up until 1995, which was after a number of flooding events, we basically allowed the developer to choose the method of runoff control. And I think that's reflected by Eastgate, the Rickey Circle area, the Austin Circle area, what was done there is that there are no street inlets, there are no storm sewer pipes of any kind, and what happens is that the streets are basically the overflow area, or they serve as an extension of the detention basins. So what happens there when you have the high water events is that the streets all get blocked, filled with water and blocked, because basically the streets, the surface of the streets is serving as the stormwater collection and storage system. So in 1995, the city became more aggressive about designing, going back in and making sure that there were inlets and pipes that carried the water out of and away from the streets. In 2004 and 2005, the Planning Commission spent time reviewing the plat for Quail Meadows Estates, which is the very flat piece of land that's on the north side of Schilling Road to the west of Ohio. And rear yard drainage, the flatness of the land, the long blocks that were proposed was a discussion point, and what we were going to point out here is what our experience has been, is that when you rely on swales or graded or earthen type swales or ditches in the backyards, when you do that and there's lawns and grass involved, it's really hard to maintain a grade over a period of distance that will ensure that the water moves in a particular direction. It's also very difficult to educate lot buyers and home builders about swales and rear yard drainage easements, because they're not real noticeable. Their swales tend to have a gentle slope to them. They're not obvious, and so when you use the grass and dirt area, sometimes those areas are regraded, sometimes they're filled, sometimes somebody wants their lot to be higher than their neighbor, and that gets modified, and it's really hard for us in the field to monitor or enforce changes that occur out there. When you have swales or ditches that are grass or earthen, they're very hard to deal with ongoing maintenance. Sometimes people put fences in there, or they elevate railroad ties for a garden, or we even saw cases where a dumping area for lawn clippings basically became a dam, and where a swale was supposed to be and blocked drainage. And then the other thing is that if you're dealing with a subdivision that has very long blocks and the topography is very flat, it's hard to make that water move the direction you want it to. So in 2005, after much discussion about the advantages of using a concrete flume or ribbon in the backyard, that became a standard or for rear yard drainage, not in every single case, but where we had flat topography, long blocks, and we just couldn't expect that rear yard grades and drainage could be achieved any other way. So we had, in Quail Meadows Estates, we have the rear yard concrete ribbons as part of subdivision drainage plans. That was also carried out in Golden Eagle Estates number 4, which is south of Wayne Avenue here, and Eagle Crest Twin Homes Edition, and then the Red Fox Edition that's on East Cloud that this commission looked at. In our discussions with the applicant developers here who have the flumes in edition number 4, they were dissatisfied with those as a solution, and we said there has to be some solution proposed or an approach for dealing with rear yard drainage. The approach that has been selected is to have no rear yard drainage, meaning that there won't be any water that will be carried to the rear yard, and what is proposed is to have a grading plan that would result in the high point of each lot being at the back where the two rear lot lines meet. And I think, John, we have a sketch that depicts that.
It doesn't show real well.
Yeah, did not depict very well. These arrows indicate that this is a rear lot line. There would be a grading. This would be the high point. All the graded area on the lot would come here. The water from this area and from the back of the house would come through the side yards. There was a second piece to that showed it from a front angle. I think this is probably not intended here, that if you use the side yard, you'd want the low point to be the center, but this would depict that the idea is that the water from rear yard areas would be transferred out to the street. So we certainly have some areas where water comes through the side yards between houses, but it's usually areas where we have quite a bit of slope or terrain change. So we looked at this, discussed it with the applicant and their design engineer, and I guess I would describe staff as wanting to be open-minded about taking a new approach, but still skeptical that this would actually work. Mr. Nelson, who's reviewed the subdivision drainage plans, has concluded that it could conceivably work if the original elevation and grades are not later altered in the field. And so to make this work, it's going to take very close cooperation between the developers, their engineers, the home builders, in terms of communicating that. And also, we think it's going to put a burden on city field inspectors to catch those things. And so obviously, any alteration by a future homeowner, especially in that side yard area between homes, could disrupt that plan. And so one way to help ensure that would be to make the side yards that go between the homes, have those be designated as drainage easements, but then you would still have to strictly enforce the prohibition on obstructing easements. So we did want to bring to your attention what we think is probably the most unusual part, and I guess if you could go back to the layout, John, of the plat. These perimeter areas here will have the conventional, there are good adequate places for the rear yard drainage here to get, we have the Huntington ditch here, we have the oxbow, we have another oxbow back here. The plan is it's for this area here where you have a rather lengthy block, and so the plan is that you'd have a ridge or a crest through here, and that all these lots would drain back to the street. And so just by way of illustration, I guess if you could go back to the footprint drawing, John. One of the concerns I expressed is that if this is the house, this is the driveway is built, person decides that they want to put a wing on here to store their boat or camper or something, more than likely they're going to build this up and make it level with their drive, which means that the original plan was for water to come through here is going to be diverted somewhere else. I see that as challenging to try to monitor that type of approach. But the plan is that on the plat, the rear areas in Block 2 would be for utilities only, not for drainage, and that there would be no drainage easements or no intended improvements in that area.
Dean, just while we're talking about that, would there be any restrictions for fences then and gates? I mean, like a common fence that would go between the two side
Well, I would think that, and we've had a great deal of discussion about covenants, but I would think that one thing that would want to be addressed along that line is that obviously, if there was a wooden privacy fence along here, that and solid wood gates, that could impact the usability of that to transmit water, or certainly impede that. And I don't know how again, the plan to execute this is to try to document the heck out of it on the plat, to try to then carry it out in the field, and then the developers are planning to have a set of covenants where they make that clear to execute it. But I think that you could go out and do the infrastructure, put the streets, curbing, utilities in, and get the lots all graded and ready to go in this grading plan or configuration, and we could go out and inspect that and conclude that it had been graded that way. But then the challenge will be, as homes start to get built and lots develop and people start customizing their yards, whether you can still make that work. I said we are open to new approaches, but there's not we don't have any experience in this type of approach to rely on. So it's a new approach in that regard, and so probably that's what we identified as an item about this particular phase that's probably different. The other thing, I guess, John, if you could go back to the plat, and I will let Mr. Nelson be short and sweet, but this is the 500-foot line here, and so their options are to have no basements, or to do slab on grade, or to have what a Army Corps of Engineer approved design basement. And I'll let Mr. Nelson, he's just gotten through reviewing one of those, and to give you a summary of what that entails and how it's different than a conventional basement.
Construction within the 500-foot of center line of the flood control levee is what the Corps of Engineers refers to as their critical zone. All construction, be it a basement, a utility installation, crossing of the levee, is reviewed by the Corps of Engineers. It goes through the city engineering office, and then those plans are sent to the Corps of Engineers for review. The Corps states that they have no prohibitions against construction near the levee. However, they do have guidelines that are very specific. It adds a considerable amount of cost to many of the projects that occur during this area. And of course, the Corps and the City of Salina, we both have a big stake in the stability and viability of the flood control levee to protect our citizens from catastrophic disasters that we've seen recently from Louisiana in the hurricanes, in Iowa and Missouri in the recent floodings. So, in a nutshell, with a residential basement, the design requirements for a basement are such that the structure itself is going to have to be heavy enough to resist being pushed up out of the ground by hydraulic pressure from the riverside of the levee. By doing so, that it limits the possibility of that hydraulic pressure from pushing up and boiling up on the land side and creating a failure. And for the concrete to resist cracking and failure, an additional amount of reinforcing iron is required to keep the concrete stable. So typically we're looking at somewhere around twice the expense for a builder to build a basement that would meet core requirements. That's about as short as sweet as I can.
Are there differences even on a slab on grade foundation for what you would do within
Well,
500 feet?
There are. Again, it's a matter of weight and width and reinforcing bar, and although those would be much shallower in depth, those foundations would also meet that requirement to resist the hydraulic pressures pushing up from beneath and popping it up out of the ground.
Is what our experience has been until the River Trail subdivision, which is to the east of this and up against the levee, is that nobody was trying to even build basements within the 500-foot area over in Eastgate and Geico Addition and Hidden Meadows. Those are all slab-on-grade homes, and nobody even attempted to design or build a basement in that area. But in River Trail, they've attempted to do design and construction that would meet the core standards. And so I think what we're saying here is in the 500-foot area, you're not prohibited from having a basement, but a conventional basement is not going to be the norm in that area.
It's just by adding or extending utilities into this area, those two are under scrutiny from the Corps of Engineers, and the plans, the infrastructure plans for this development are in the Corps office now under review.
And in the 100-year floodplain area, what are the...
In the area that is in mapped 100-year floodplain, again, you would be restricted to a slab-on-grade home, where the home would be, the lowest floor of the home would have to be at or above the 100-year flood elevation. What has occurred in many of our areas where the ground might be 3 to 4 inches low from the floodplain elevation is that through grading or modest filling, the lot is graded or filled, it is surveyed and determined to be above, it's officially removed based on that, and once it's removed from the floodplain, then there's no restriction on having a basement. And that's been a very common occurrence, because a lot of our areas, even these, the part that's below the 100-year flood elevation might be 2, 3, 4 inches below. We're not talking about, feet below a flood elevation, but the surveyor is obliged to show us where the contour line is, and I said this needs further refinement, but what this is saying is that these lots here, as they are naturally today, are below 1231 in elevation, which means that they would be limited to slab-on-grade construction unless that was revised. And so we'll work with them to get that refined so that that's as accurate as we can be as it relates to the risk in this subdivision.
Mr. Chairman, I would add, as far as construction within the critical zone, we're focusing on the area of 0 to 500 feet from the center line of the levee. However, there are still restrictions that extend out to 1,000 feet from the center line of the levee, and the same requirements at 1,000 feet apply as they would at 500 feet. However, the distance from the levee itself then would indicate, or would normally say, that your design doesn't have to be as heavy or strong as it does at 500 feet, but those requirements would still be more than what your typical average everyday residential basement would be.
Does the Corps take into account what kind of soil this is? A very sandy soil would certainly be subject to this hydraulic pressure you're talking about. And
they do indeed.
And whereas a heavy clay You know, that's like a dam.
The Corps does take into account what the soil conditions are, and of course with the construction of the levee itself, we have quite a nice record of soil borings throughout the length of the levee itself, and when a design is being put forth, we provide the design engineer copies of the boring logs so that they can indeed get a accurate account for what that hydraulic pressure is going to be on the different layers.
So I think what we counted was 47 out of the 77 lots were impacted by the 1,000 or 500 foot line. And then if you take this flood fringe boundary into account, you're talking about, you know, a lot here, probably the majority here and here that are not impacted in any way. The others are going to be impacted in some way as to having a basement or having a conventional basement. But again, we'll work on refining the floodplain boundary, but this boundary is pretty well fixed, and anything inside this area, the type of construction there will be impacted slightly by the Corps of Engineers restrictions. As we noted, the drainage, what we had over here is we had a proposed dedication of additional drainage right-of-way to improve the Huntington ditch here. I think unless that's done as part of the subdivision improvements, that's going to be deferred improvement. And I think those are the items that we wanted to touch in: the impact of the proximity to the levee, the impact of the floodplain. Actually, another impact then is the transmission line easement that goes through there. I think one of the good news points is that the West Star Transmission Group has agreed to release their, what some interpreted as a point-to-point and some as a blanket easement, and to accept an easement mapped and dedicated on this plat as their transmission line easement. So we think that's a good thing, because having it depicted on this plat will put people on notice that it's there, and hopefully what limitations are that relate to that. I think what we would like to do is take any questions that you have related to the subdivision to the staff, and then let the applicant and their design engineer explain their subdivision concept, particularly the grading for lot or block 2, and then we'll kind of take it from there in terms of the comfort level of the commission with the grading plan for block 2. So I think we would open up for any questions you have about the subdivision that's been presented.
Okay, any questions of staff, including Wayne?
Yeah, I didn't quite get all that exciting information. Could you go over that again for me?
What part would you like to hear?
Yeah. If I never hear about basements on in that area again the rest of my life, I will have lived.
Any questions? Well, maybe it's appropriate to hear from the developer and see what the plans are. State your name, address, please.
I'm Greg Adams, 210 West 14th Street in Junction City, Kansas. I'm with Campbell & Johnson Engineers, design engineer for the developer, Mr. Tim Howson. Chairman and Commissioners, I appreciate, again, the time that you take on this and all your projects. It's quite an endeavor. Each project takes a lot of time. We appreciate it. And again, we appreciate the staff and all their intense and diligent work to provide you good background information. Just very quickly, the 3 points that main points have been brought up today: the 100-year flood, making sure that it's taken care of on the plat. In our grading plan, we've actually got planned right now to bring all of those lots on the west end up above 1231. So there really shouldn't be any issue with the 100-year plain. Once we get it graded, they'll all be above the flood elevation, and then they'll build their houses up on top of that, and it shouldn't be any issue. As far as the core requirements for basements up against the levee, we believe as part of the infrastructure project that we have to address those requirements, as Wayne told you, for our trenching and our sanitary sewers, and we have to consider all that uplift pressure and so forth. As far as basements are concerned, Tim is going to have, the builders will have a requirement by the city to meet those core standards. And I'm not sure what part we play in that from an infrastructure standpoint, other than our plans have to be approved by the Corps, and Wayne's working with us to make that happen. But that'll come. Basements will come. Builders will have to bring a design to the city that'll meet Corps approval. So I'm sure that can be taken care of. Feels like maybe the biggest issue is the rear yard drainage there on Block 2, and we do appreciate the staff and their willingness to. At first, they told us they wanted flumes, and we just don't want to do that if they're not beneficial and useful and effective. And if something better could be done than with the materials we have, then we'd like to try that. And so we brought the idea to Dean and Wayne and sat down. They talked about it, and we're willing to look at the idea of having the lots basically drain from the back of the lot out to the streets. And we just I know even the staff, I guess I can't speak for them, but I think they recognize some of the limitations of even the flumes, the concrete flumes. If you'll go to Quail Meadows and look at those flumes, they're really quite, they're even hard to maintain. I think that the nice thing about them is that they're easy to enforce. As far as if someone comes with a complaint, they have to say, well, you have to grade to these flumes, and the flume is to take it. But when you go out there, the fences are built up to them, and even when a yard is being built, they can get silted in, and even a flume. So a flume can also be dammed up, and the water have trouble flowing down that flume. A lot of times they're pretty minimal grades, and so they can just kind of be a maintenance issue. And so, and I'm not sure what methods the city has in each homeowner maintaining their section of the flume, or is it the city's responsibility or what? I'm not sure, but if their section gets silted in. But we just, and another thing, I guess the thing that a lot of utilities are wanting us to do now with the flumes, a flume to me seems like it could be effective if it's on the lot line. Each homeowner will grade to that flume. They know exactly where their grade line is, but now we offset those because the utilities don't want to cross them. I guess I can't remember the exact reason why, but utilities want us to offset that to one side of the easement. So now we've got 10 feet. It's 10 feet onto one property line, where the grading of this lot coming to its property line still has 10 feet of this lot to get to the flume. And this person here has a flume 10 foot into his yard. It just seems a little awkward, I guess. I'm not exactly sure that it's bad or whatever, just awkward for grading and maintenance between the two property owners. So from my standpoint, our idea is a good idea, and I think would be easy to enforce personally. If a person comes with this plan and we depict it well on the plat or a supplementary document that's filed or something that, and Tim will get into that we do have some mechanisms for that, If they come with a complaint about rear yard drainage, to me, it's quite simple. It's their responsibility. The drainage comes from their rear yard to their curb, and it's their responsibility to get it from the back to the front. So there's really no issues with the side property owners or maintaining a flume. The only maintaining is maintaining your own yard, maintaining that drainage around the side of your house to the front. So just from my standpoint, it seems easier to do it that way. And we've seen developments that have this. And in fact, my lot itself is in a flat area, and we do that. It drains from the back to the front. And I've never even thought of there being an issue with that, but there could be, and we appreciate the staff's scrutiny on the situation. But that's our plan, and I don't know if Tim wants to maybe address the covenants and so forth on helping each builder to know that and be aware that that's how their drainage has to work or not. But I take questions if you have any of me.
You'd allow your telephone number to be inscribed in the concrete so that when they're flooding, they can give you a call and remind them again of why this was working. I mean, I'm very
I thought the
skeptical.
same thing.
Me too,
Yeah.
right? From a practical standpoint, it seems to me like Sydney said, there's going to be fences between these houses, and the first thing that's going to happen, somebody's going to build a raised planter there, and they're going to put plants in it, and that's going to flood, and it's going to affect his neighbors, because there's going to be stuff there. I guess the other thing I'd like to hear is from Mr. Howison, how do we enforce this, even if it's in the covenants?
You may have to have a drainage system as shown there, which Dean said really wasn't very practical. You could have a ditch. The lot line is on a ridge so that each house has its own drainage swale.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I drew that, and it actually wasn't a mistake. I actually did have the swale on the property.
On each side.
So that each individual
you wanna
owner,
go to that,
as I said, would be
that 5?
responsible.
For his own lot drainage,
Right.
yeah, I'm following. I think they're thinking backflow. I understand what you're saying. You're saying street flow.
We were thinking that the low point would be the common property line where the two side lot lines join, but what Greg is saying is that this is intentional, and the idea, again, I think the only thing to keep into perspective is that these houses will be 7.5 feet from the property line and 15 feet from each other, so you'll have to accomplish that
A very short.
within that area, and so
That's just like
that is good to know. But I think that's something that both Mr. Nelson and I looked at that, and I said, well, this was probably supposed to be inverted so that the lot line was the low point, but that basically, from our understanding, would then you'd have two swales. One, each owner would be responsible for their swale, and
Okay,
then there
now-
actually would be a ridge between.
So the distance between the houses is 15 feet?
Minimum.
Minimum, yes. I mean, you may have some that are greater, but the minimum setback from side property line is 7.5 feet. So in many cases, you'll have 15
Put two
feet
swales
between.
in that and some grass and
And a fence.
a partridge and a pear tree.
And a dog and a kid.
There's a lot of neighborhoods that are that way now, but where I live is that way. I mean, it's,
Is it?
yeah.
With two swales?
No, but it slopes from the back to the front. What do you anticipate the height from the back to the street to be?
Yeah.
Elevation. I mean, how much slope are you going to have? Do you have any idea?
Yeah, there's a minimum of 2 feet from back to front. And
Feet.
right.
To drain 110 lineal feet.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah, we.
Can you give us an idea how wide this swale would be? I mean, are we talking 3 feet or 4 feet?
Well, the bottom probably wouldn't. It'd probably just be a V ditch.
But like at the top, what are we talking? 3 feet wide and 6 inches deep, or?
Yeah, I think I don't have the design for each house. Basically we're just saying that the drainage is the responsibility of the owner.
So the developer would ultimately have to submit a plan to the city that would conform to all of our now famous SWIPs and things like that, but
Right, if you know, they'll get into it with the covenants, but this plan would actually be a part of the covenants, and we have actually set elevations, a range of elevation that they can put their main floor. Because one problem with this is that if someone puts their house up high, then yeah, they don't have room to do that soil. So we've put a minimum and a maximum so that the houses are about the same. And then if they deviate from that, then they have to submit a drainage plan before they can build. If they deviate from those elevations, then they have to submit a plan that's approved by the city engineer's office.
What kind of tolerance are you talking about? A foot?
About a foot. 1 foot. So to me, that helps. It keeps all the houses at the same elevation. It's not much above the curb, but enough to get drainage and so forth. And so you're not going to have. I mean, this is some vertical exaggeration to let you know what's going on. I mean, it's not going to look exactly like that.
It's only 2 foot to drain it.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Well, there's actually quite a bit of water that comes into that because the roof drains from those houses all go into that swale.
Right. But if someone builds a planter there and blocks their water, that's, you know, and it goes on to the neighbor, I'd say the neighbor would have a complaint and could talk to the city about that. And I don't know, you know, we talked about easements on the side. I suppose that's a way to eliminate that issue, that if it's an easement, then they've got to maintain.
Wouldn't necessarily have to be on the plat. It could be through the covenants. I mean, in that regard. But to do that, then I think our point is that if you rely on the covenants, then you've got to be very vigilant about enforcing the covenants. And I think whether that's exclusively private, I think the city staff, whether it's building permit plan reviewers or engineering staff, is going to have a role to play in that. And I think that's the approach that we have taken, and it's why we're here at this point today, is that Mr. Nelson and I have looked at it and said, yes, this could conceivably work. But it's going to be in the execution and carrying it out to ensure that it gets from concept to execution in the field. That will be the challenging part, and that's not going to be your challenge. That will be our challenge. But what we wanted to do was to just make a point to you that the concept that's being proposed here is certainly different than what you have seen in many other subdivisions that have come before the commission. And so we're prepared to work to carry that out, but wanted to just make note of that and bring that to your attention.
Now the water all goes into the street. Is there then an underground system that takes it to a nearby
Yes.
oxbow?
Yes, there's, well, it goes either, I don't know how to describe it without showing you a picture.
East
but,
or west?
Yeah, right, it goes east or west, that's right. And there's, you see a utility easement about 2/3 of the way, almost at that 500-foot mark. Yeah, right there's one, clear to the west. And then there's another one to the right, yeah, right there. So that's where, and the water is brought into those two locations for the, there's a crest in the center, and it drains both directions, and then into either the ditch or the oxbow. And
And you got elevation differences enough to be able to do that?
yes, and I say 2 feet from the back to the front. 2 feet is from the back lot line to the front lot line, but depends on where you're at in that street slope. You could have, there's at least 1 more foot, and in some places 2 more feet down to the curb, depending on, you know, if you're in the bottom or up at the crest of the street. So you could have a 4-foot drop, but the lot has to be at that 100-foot or 100-year floodplain. So that's where the 2 feet is, but there's actually more than that down to the curb.
Oh, okay. Okay. Mr. Howison? Oh, don't leave us yet. Oh. geez.
My mouth tends to get pretty dry up here sometimes. Well, first thing I want to address is on the lots on the west half. I've already spoken to Von Beamer, which is a dirt contractor, and he's given me a bid to raise all of those lots on that west part where you see your BFE line there. So everything on this plat will be taken out of the 100-year floodplain. It'd be a developer's disaster to not do it, because those lots on the west part are beyond the 1,000-foot line, which can have basements, so why would you shoot yourself in the foot to not do that? Secondly, we do want access to the dirt on the 50-foot dedication on the ditch over there, and we're willing to work with the engineer department on a proper depth. We could probably dig that down because we're going to need that dirt to help fill this west part of the plat, but we essentially are going to save the city a lot of money by doing a lot of that, because now you guys won't have to do it. And because of the timing, we're going to have to do it earlier to get this plat elevated. Also, we have a very large pile of dirt just north of the substation down there. I don't know if Dean can point that out, but where the substation is, but there's I think 500 plus truckloads of dirt down there. It's about 20 feet high and about 40 feet wide, and that we moved off with the Eagle Crest improvements. So we've got a lot of dirt down there, and then we've got some dirt coming out of the street on Wildcat Circle. So dirt's not an issue. We may actually have too much dirt. Our engineer told us we probably ought to elevate some on the east side over there along the dike to get that flow going westerly. And so I'll check with him before we finalize that, and then probably, if Wayne has some input, that's fine. We'd like to coordinate, but not a lot of elevation, but just enough to have positive drainage. This plat is very difficult. It's been very hard to design because we've got so many obstacles: the dike, the 500-year line, the 500-foot line, 1,000-foot line, the drainage to the west, drainage to the north, Oxbow to the north and south, utility easement on the south. It was very difficult to lay this out to get everything to work. And but our concept on that block 2 on the drainage is to elevate the rear of the lots. The drawing that he had really was, as he said, is kind of an exaggeration, but your back side of your lot will be a minimum of 2 feet higher than the curb out there. Now obviously you're going to have it lower along the side of the houses to get the water out of there. But it won't be any different than like on Huntington, where we have these small 71, 73-foot lots. You're still going to be going down graduated down, so it's not going to be like that 60-degree angle or 45. It should be about I'd say a 35, 40-degree angle. So how we're going to enforce this, and we'd had a meeting with Dean and Wayne and my engineer back here on about 6 weeks ago, and it was agreed that tentatively what we would do is draw covenants, and we would, first of all, the first phase would, anybody that's buying a lot down there is going to have to initial on that particular covenant that says that they're agreeable to work with the drainage plan and the elevation specified on that block 2. Block 2 is where the issue's at, the interior block. And second level of checking on this would be the city permits department. And of course, we've got a pre-designated elevation all the way through that block where Wayne and Campbell and Johnson have worked on this on a pre-designated elevation on how high that foundation on each one of those homes will be at the maximum. It has to be, on my feelings, it needs to be within about a 4 to 6 inch tolerance so that to keep everything going as smoothly as possible. Because 2 foot of drop isn't a whole lot, but we could make it 3 if we needed to. But having the rear of the lots elevated is actually an advantage to the electric company because they want their electric boxes up high. They don't want them down low where the water's going to accumulate and short out their box. You can ask Westar, DSNO, they'll all tell you the same thing. Right now, out north, I'm having to redo an electric line because a homeowner came in and elevated too high around his foundation on a 6-acre lot. And now the electric box, which is 100 feet from the house, is sitting down low, and the water is going to go towards it. So now we got to go back, raise the box, put new wire in, and elevate it so it won't take water in the box. So an elevation at the rear of the lots is far better for the electric companies. The third level of check on this, okay, second level was when they get a building permit. They're going to have a pre-designated elevation that when they bring in a site plan with a house drawing, they're going to have to show the elevation of the foundation, and this is also something we've coordinated with them, but they'll have to coordinate it with the building permits inspection before they get an approval for a permit. The third level is if they violate that, they've got to have, before they get a final occupancy permit, they're going to have to show a grade plan now and pull an engineer in or somebody to show how they're going to drain this, which is going to put them right back to what we've designed. So it's not a deal of whether they have any choice.
But go back just 1 second. How do we know that?
Well, actually, once it hits the permits level, then the city permits and inspection's going to have control of it at that point. But before they give an occupancy permit that you can occupy that house, you will have to have met this drainage being within the parameters that the city engineer feels is reasonable.
I see all that going just fine. It's going.
Well, I don't think it's going to be an issue either.
But
we haven't had any problems on drainage. It wasn't our subdivision that ever started an issue on this. Golden Eagle, let me tell you something. 1993, we got it right in our covenants that we regulate the elevations. We've had 0 issues on the south 60 acres. So this happened in another subdivision that caused this, and you got 99% of it going well. You got 1% that caused all this.
I'm concerned about 15 years from now, because you're not going to get the telephone calls. The city will get the telephone calls, and somehow it's going to be the city's fault for allowing this to happen when there's a high, a rain incident where there's high water. I think you can do it at the building stage just fine, but when somebody puts
it's the best way to do it.
When somebody puts a pond in, and then they've got the rocks and they've got the ledges here, and that's all going to go out of everybody's control at that point.
One thing Dean brought up that I'm in agreement with, and I think putting a couple issues on the covenants would help solidify this. After I heard him speak, I'm going to add to the covenants that, these are only 73, 75-foot wide lots, the most part of them. Yeah. So you don't have a lot of room for side parking. But nonetheless, people still try to do it, on these little lots. So I'm going to add on the covenants that there won't be any side parking along the side of the house. And something to the fact, I'll go over it with Dean, but that they can't put anything in there that's going to impair the natural drainage. We'll go over what should be said, but I think that's probably a good idea. Secondly, I want to tell you, fences, privacy fences, many, 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 many times all across town do sit on the low spot on the lot. They're right on the edge. They're on the edge of my lot on Meyer Drive. We got a 100-foot wide lot. The low spot's where the privacy fence sits for the neighbor and me. Drainage still comes down between the houses, right around the fence. And you're not talking about $50,000 or $80,000 house here. You're talking about, upwards $200,000 homes. So I really don't see people trying to impede this. But
I don't think
one of the other things we're going to add is I'm going to talk with Dean, but I think some kind of a reasonable a covenant that will designate the side 3 to 4 feet of each lot as drainage easement, not to be impeded. And I'll have to work with them a little bit on the wordage, but I think that's very reasonable, and we want it to work, or we wouldn't have gone to all this trouble to lay out these covenants like we did. And the engineer wouldn't have spent the time he did to try to lay it out. We want this drainage to work, and the only way it will work is if it's complied with on that block 2 all the way through. Get my glasses on.
Are covenants enforceable by the city?
You don't get a building permit, you're not going to get in. They're going to.
Well, the...
No, I'm talking about after
the-
the fact, 5, 10
s-
years down
Well,
the
the
line.
standard answer is no. We do have one case, it was a fairly unusual case of a subdivision in East Salina where the city commission was not going to approve any development there. The promise was that the covenants and the standards would be the same as they were in the adjoining subdivision. There was not going to be an approval of that unless the city became an approving agency of enforcing those covenants. As an example, the subdivision next door did not allow anybody to build detached garages. So the new subdivision agreed to put that as a provision in their covenants, but the city commission wanted the city staff to enforce that through the permit process rather than, because we would not normally enforce that. We would make the either the residents or the private developer enforce that. I'll give you another example. In the Georgetown edition, which is an older area in East Salina, they had a covenant that said the front yard setback requirement is 30 feet for a house. Our zoning requirement is 25 feet. We issued permits for houses with 25-foot setbacks and said it's up to the private developer to enforce that 30-foot requirement. If the plans meet the city's requirements, we're going to approve it. So that becomes the hybrid, and that's where I think we've tried that we're going to have to at least mirror through some plat approval conditions to reinforce some of the covenants if there's an expectation for city staff to be an enforcing part of that. And so it can work, but it will require education of everybody. It will require educating the city staff and inspectors who are out there to be vigilant, to know what to look for. It's going to require, you can have the best covenants in the world, but if you don't get them into people's hands to read and understand, then they're not worth the paper they're printed on. So the challenge will be informing and educating lot buyers, builders, and inspectors. It can be done, and it has been done, but it will just be more work.
I guess what I'm worried about is the second and third and fourth owner.
But Monroe, it doesn't make any difference what the city makes on rules. What I put in the covenants, no matter what, I guarantee you somebody is going to challenge it, and somebody is, and we've seen it out north. We had somebody traded a lot to somebody else. All of a sudden they're building out there. They didn't have our approval on what to build, and that place has been a rat's nest from day one. And if a fire come along, the best thing to happen, burn it all down. And we hate it out there, and the people around it tried to do something about it. They tried to get us to do something about it. They took it to court a couple times, and it is really hard to get that stuff done. But I can tell you, somebody doesn't abide by this on this block too, they're going to deal with us because I'm going to do something about it. Now, while it's being built, I think once it's built, we'll probably be, I feel, 99% there, but you could still have somebody try to pull something. But that's why I feel that I think maybe a separate drainage easement document showing the side 3 foot of each lot on block 2 as drainage easement, or something that Dean and I come up with. We could record it after the plat.
And
It's there.
I think the grading plan or the concept that we're seeing here, needs to be basically attached and incorporated into the covenants. And it's also, my thought is that it's incorporated as part of the plat.
Yeah.
So that the two don't become separated, because the grading plan for block 2 is an integral part of the plat. So they need to be joined together.
But I would like to go of record that we'd like to get that dirt out of that ditch. And I realize you guys probably don't have any authority, but I just want to go down the minutes that all through this, we want to, because there's a lot of dirt in there, and we're dedicating it, so we should get the dirt out of there to help rectify some of the lot issues here. But
You can get,
I've been told that
as
that's
far as
what
I'm
it was.
concerned, you can have all the dirt you can get your
Yeah,
hands on.
start digging
We'll go over to Red Fox Lane and pick a little up there on the back
on the way back through.
Well, Dean, where are we with all this?
Well, there are two other things I wanted to touch on. We had a lot of discussions with the fire department about emergency response. This is not related necessarily to, but we, to my knowledge, we don't have a, we've got some streets that start here and go around like that are half moons. We don't have a full planet like this where this has got all one street name. And we're going to have to pick a spot here to start, but we're going to have addressing sequence and numbers that, you know, this is approximately the 1400 block east, and so we're going to have to pick that. At some point we're going to have numbers that get bigger here, and then we're going to have other numbers that perhaps get bigger going the other direction. But we have talked with the fire marshal, and we're going to come up with an acceptable plan. But just to be, this is all Wildcat Circle, and of course these lots all pretty much line up with each other. Well, they can't all be 1500 east. They'll have to have something different. So we will come up with a sequence on that. The other thing I wanted to discuss from staff's perspective is that our expectation is not relating to the substation, but that as these lots develop, that we would have sidewalk here tying into a sidewalk both sides of Red Hawk Lane. Obviously, on the park portion, the city would be responsible for the sidewalk, but our expectation is that there would not be a waiver of the sidewalk requirement. Wildcat Circle is not really a short cul-de-sac street. It's a fairly lengthy street with lots of houses on it, and that sidewalks should be required on that street as if it were a conventional street. So I wanted to touch those two issues, and then we were kind of developing this in discussion, and I guess there was, I will maybe run this language by, because I think it could be covenant language, but and maybe the developer can, maybe they can't, but the city is generally the party that issues a certificate of occupancy that allows a dwelling to be occupied. What I've jotted down is some possible language here, which again puts the burden back on us, but it basically says if at the time of final inspection it's determined that a deviation from the approved grading plan has occurred on a lot, no certificate of occupancy will be issued until the lot grading is brought into compliance or an alternative grading plan is approved by the city engineer. I think from all the discussions that we have had from developers and other even builders, it says if you want to get, if there's a problem and you want to get something addressed, get it addressed before the certificate of occupancy to use it at that time. So again, that would call for a judgment call in the field.
So there wouldn't be even a temporary.
Oh, there could probably be in the business and commercial side of things, we will issue a temporary CO, and there might be a guarantee related to completion of landscaping or completion of some particular thing. If we had an agreed upon plan, I could see that we would have if we could have an enforceable compliance agreement. But again, you're talking about things that we might normally work on a large hotel or a office building that you wouldn't normally do with a residential dwelling. So
Seems very staff labor intensive.
what I've got, and I will share these. We were able to produce them in writing while this was occurring, but I have some ideas here that, first of all, as far as conditions that we would want to apply here is that clearly the developer is going to be responsible for all the public improvements on the infrastructure plans that Mr. Nelson has reviewed and approved. That would be related to Water Street, the sanitary sewer, and the storm improvements that get water to the oxbows, that the primary electric lines and service lines here will be required to be placed underground, and it'll be Mr. Howson's responsibility to work with Westar to provide the trenching and the conduit and backfilling, which he's very familiar with. That sidewalks would be required on both sides of Red Hawk Lane and Wildcat Circle, and sidewalks required on the north side of Wayne, but no responsibility in front of the Westar subdivision or the substation there, because there is no way to really get a sidewalk across that culvert and ditch there, so it would not connect to anything. That I think it's the other thing that's going to be very important that we haven't discussed much is that in this area here, you're not really going to be able to have any outbuildings or fences or large shade trees within that transmission line easement without the consent of Westar. So we're going to have to document that and make sure that's clear to buyers. That we're not going to commence the public improvements here till we have final engineering design plans approved, and that would include the Corps of Engineers as well as the city engineer. It is our standard that we go out and inspect the improvements and issue a certificate of completion before any permits are issued. And then this is the part that will work to coordinate with the covenants, but that any deviations from the approved grading plan on any lot must be reviewed and approved by the city engineer prior to issuance of a building permit. And then the other language about what occurs at the time of final inspection. I think we should expect, it may not happen, but there may be a builder that says, I've got a better way than this. And so they ought to be able to have the opportunity to do that, but that would need to be reviewed as part of the building permit application by the city engineer to at least acknowledge that. And then we will work to get final plat corrections done before this goes to the city commission for final action, just to clean up any loose ends. But what I've done is got those, put those to writing so that I think rather than trying to, if everybody is comfortable with those, that rather than trying to piece something together, that if those 9 conditions could be incorporated into any motion. And then it goes without saying that although we don't have it identified here, that there will be a set of covenants that will be reviewed and approved by staff that will be recorded with the plat, that will carry out the intent of putting people on notice of what the drainage plan is and the need to be consistent with that. I think we would agree with Mr. Adams that we're certainly not here to say that flumes are the answer to everything, because flumes aren't maintenance or enforcement free either. And so as long as people privately own property and as long as they want to customize property to meet their needs and desires, there's not one solution that you can come up with that a property owner can't alter, and so you just have to count on that being the case. So we've tried a lot of different approaches. The flumes was just another approach that said, you know, that should address a lot of the rear yard drainage issues. But the other problem that Tim mentioned is that if somebody goes in and they put their foundation 5 feet above the curb elevation and everybody else is at 3 feet above the curb elevation, the people at 3 feet are getting all the water. And they'll pick up the phone and call us and say, how did the city allow this? And we're still leaving it to the individual developer to determine how they want to address foundation elevations and things like that.
We would probably file an injunction on them with the judge and make them cut the foundation down, because that isn't going to work. I mean, I don't know how else you can do it, because you got to stop it up front. The thing about the odd and even numbers and streets up here, Wildcat Circle, I know the city's always had this problem where they got a loop. And of course, when you go north of north of Iron, you got different addresses than if you go south, you know, on the flip sides on the blocks, you know, on the odd and the even numbers. Well, the only easy way I see to do this is where that utility easement runs down the middle of block 2. Is everything north of that would be North Wildcat Circle, and everything south would be South Wildcat Circle.
I got a better idea.
We could make it, or you could go odd, even, odd on the top, even on the bottom, or vice versa.
It's a cul-de-sac, and I know what they're trying to do, the 1400. How about number 1, 2, 3, 4? There's 77 lots, right? Hey, I'm okay with that. So how many Red Hawk lanes are there going to, circles are going to be, or Wildcat, or what is this, Wildcat Circle? We're not going to find one across town. Heck, they did it up on Crestview. Why can't you do it with Wildcat?
All right, that'd be an easy way.
Postmen will figure it out. They're smart. And what, this was going to be householder, we're changing this in the final plat, the right, householder circle? Is that,
I think it should have 2 names. That's my
yeah,
feeling.
2 names.
Well, you know, fire, police, they can figure these things out because they take some training and do that, but it's for unfamiliar drivers trying to find their long-lost uncle, and they're in the middle of the night, and they're trying to find it. And
They got to go around.
Are you going to be selling to long-lost uncles in that area?
We won't put Jayhawk Circle on the bottom.
Jayhawk Circle.
It ain't going to happen.
Don't. No.
That was our idea. Just divide it in half, and one half would be Jayhawk, the other half would be Wildcat.
There you go. Oh my gosh. Hatfield McCoy's over there, moving in that
Couldn't
neighborhood.
deny the plat, did it?
Yeah.
Tim would not accept that solution.
Yeah.
okay. I'm not sure I'm on top of this, but are we ready to approve this plat?
Well, I think what we want to do is have a
recommendations, or-
thorough discussion and understanding of the grading plan and what it entails. We're not ready to sit, we wouldn't be here today if we were going to say, no, there's no way in heck we would endorse this grading plan. We're just saying, I'm not even going to call it experimental, I'm just going to say it's a different approach. How it gets carried out is different. And it's very important that the grading plan and the plat go together. So basically what we're saying here is that we believe that the grading plan that's prepared by Campbell and Johnson needs to be incorporated with the plat and part and parcel with it. And I think that we would be comfortable with these 9 conditions being attached, with understanding that we will work with the developers to get acceptable language in the covenants and make sure that those are recorded with the plat, and that we will work, we think there'll be some challenges, but we will work to get a understandable addressing scheme that we think that will work. We would, it's not reflected there, but again, I think maybe if we added the language that said if at the time of final inspection we determine that a deviation from the grading plan has occurred on a lot, that we would not issue a certificate of occupancy until either that's brought into compliance or say, well, here's how this could work in the alternative, and the city engineer would have to approve that.
So that'd be item number 10.
That would be in addition to number 8, that just, or it could be a 10th
Okay.
condition.
Okay.
But the way I'm looking at it is that the front part is the builder comes in with a building permit plan, and it's different than the Campbell and Johnson grading plan, that we would entertain that, but that Mr. Nelson or somebody in the engineering staff would have to review and approve that deviation. We could also get to the point where somebody didn't show us a deviation, and while in the middle of building the house they decided to change something. We get out to an inspection and find that the grades have been reversed or something, that this is basically saying that we won't issue a certificate of occupancy until the grading is restored or there's an alternative plan that we feel will work. Again, I would agree with Commissioner Soderberg that it has the potential to be staff intensive as far as the observation to make it work.
I just wanted to make one comment about item number 6. Martha Tasker had, if I'm correct, had us design a 6-inch main in the development. And I know the rationale on that, on keeping dirty water out, not getting too big a mains. You can get into that when you get too big a main like an 8-inch. But I wasn't so sure that didn't affect possibly our gallonage per minute that they need. And I just want to go down the record that that's how it was required to be designed, so that I'd hate to be caught up in this thing later and they say, well, you don't have enough water out here. Well, the city's not pushing enough water through it, and we were made to put a 6-inch main in. I don't want to get caught up on a poor design requirement.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's not going to be the line size, though. It's going to be the connections back, looping back to Wayne Avenue and then tying into the Red Fox Lane system. That's going to get the flows, not the size of the line. But Mr. Nelson's letter indicates that what we've done is there's been some modeling done by Campbell and Johnson that says if the system is hooked up in this way with 6-inch lines, we'll get 1,000 gallons per minute fire flow. And what that means is that when the system's installed and it's in the ground and everything's hooked up, that our utilities department will go out there and confirm that the system as designed will do what the model showed it would do. And just to confirm that.
See, there is an 8-inch main, to my knowledge, if I'm not incorrect, coming down Wayne Street to supply some of that multiple family, and we could have taken it on up there. But I don't think it's an issue, but I just hate to get trapped on a deal where you guys designed it this way. Well, no, we had an 8-inch, and we changed it back to 6 because we were asked to. So that's my only point.
Did I mischaracterize the modeling, Mr. Nelson?
Campbell and Johnson provided the city engineering and the utilities department a water modeling report last February, and the results of that modeling indicate that you would have over 1,000 gallons per minute flow at 20 pounds per pressure at what's known here as Node J, which would be in the northeast corner of Wildcat Circle. I'm not sure how that relates exactly to what lot number that would be, but it would be somewhere up in around lot 33 or 34 in block 1.
That would be the most remote location.
That would be the most remote location, and that includes the a tie-in to the main near the West Star Energy substation, and the looping into the Red Hawk line and bringing that up and around. So
there's a line that
we initially thought that it would require a 8 or perhaps even a 12-inch line to provide the fire flow, but with the modeling report and I think there was concern about what type of structures, residential structures were going to be provided in this subdivision once the I don't remember what level. It was, I think, a 1,500 gallon per minute fire flow requirement with a multiple occupancy type buildings. When that was removed from the plat, then we were able to make the requirement through the 6-inch line.
Okay, where are we?
I have no clue. I mean, I know where we are, I just don't know what you need from us.
Yeah,
Yeah, what you have, the single sheet that I handed out there, that if you wish to approve the final plat as proposed and incorporate that grading plan by reference, then we would recommend that the plat be approved, but with those 9 stipulations that would be attached to it.
And the addition of the occupancy
And
permit.
the addition of the language that would relate to not granting a certificate of occupancy if we found non-compliance with the plan.
Okay. Any further discussion here on the bench now? Want to try a motion?
I move passage of application P084/4A, the final plat of Golden Eagle Estates number 5 with the 9 issues that came to us as an addendum from the staff. Also added under number 8 is the language for non-compliance and the issue of occupancy permit.
I'll second it.
Okay, we have a motion, a second. Any further discussion before we vote? Seeing none, I'm going to call for the vote. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion carried, 5-0.
Can I just ask, Greg, is that your name?
That's correct.
Greg?
Is that your son?
Yes, yes.
How old is that young man? You're 10 years old? I think it's remarkable. This young man has sat there.
What about me?
Hi.
He's learning.
I'm ADD. What do you think it takes for me to sit? Where's my Where's my reward? That is good. I was noticing that too.
Remarkable young man. Thank
Okay,
you.
how about number 4?
I think we would
Being
like...
the hours late and...
I would like to push items 4 and 5. I would appreciate if you would look over the report and the information that we attach. Just, we do want to discuss with you further lot splits and our administration enforcement language, but it's not, these are internal matters. So if we move to other matters, as a housekeeping item, Commissioner Soderberg's and Commissioner Ritter's terms expire at the end of August of this year. The city clerk has informed me that a letter and expression of interest form has been mailed to you. We'll have to see if you received that or not, but it's the clerk's understanding that both Commissioner Ritter and Commissioner Soderberg would be eligible for reappointment, but that requires the submittal of the expression of interest form back to the city clerk's office. And so a reminder there, those are the only 2 that we show terms expiring in August of '08. But if you did not receive something from the city clerk, let us know and we'll make sure
It's a hint.
that you get that.
It's in the mail, right?
Public hint.
Yeah.
It isn't a hint, it's an insistence.
and we,
Right.
well, the city clerk sends us out a report and says these are the people that have responded to our, which is nice because we've got multiple boards and commissions and they keep track of that for us and we appreciate that. The other, we will meet on August the 5th. There's a development that's referred to as Timberline. It's on the west side of the railroad tracks on north side of West Republic. It's a skinny little piece of property. And there's a plan to modify a previously approved plat there that will be scheduled on that date. And then I received a
Drive right to that.
a phone call from my mother, who's a planning commissioner in Des Moines, Iowa, and she said she got a big packet in the mail from a law firm, and she figured she either had an unexpected inheritance or she was being sued, and she opened it up, and it was she was being sued, and her reason for being sued was that she was a planning commissioner and she made a bad vote, and so she called me to see if she needed her own legal counsel, and so I told her the same thing I would tell you, that no planning commissioner is individually liable for what you do. Serving on this board, it's a corporate responsibility. It's also the responsibility of the city to defend any lawsuits. But that,
So we just get sued together.
yeah, it was highly, usually the notice of the suit gets served at City Hall only, and it names all the parties. I said it must have been a intimidation tactic or something to have it mailed to your home and said you're being sued in your capacity as a planning commissioner. But
Just all be in one big cell.
yeah, I've never. That's not a very common thing. That's a lot of postage to pick out all your commissioners and mail that out to. But I assured her that the same thing with you wouldn't need to respond. That's what we have city attorneys for.
Well, at least the guy didn't drive a bulldozer through City Hall. That's what usually happens.
So that's all we would have for you this evening, and appreciate your time and attention as always.
Any other matters? We are adjourned.
Yeah, I don't know. It's a long 3 years.